Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this important and timely discussion on preparing the workforce for autonomous vehicles. I am Hilary Cain, Vice President for Technology, Innovation, and Mobility Policy at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We are the voice of the auto industry here in the US. We represent automakers as well as suppliers and technology companies that are working in the automotive space. We are focused on advancing automotive innovation and furthering the transformation to a cleaner, safer, and smarter transportation future. And through our AV policy roadmap and other advocacy, we are actively promoting government policies that support the testing and deployment of autonomous vehicles at scale in the US, and that unleash the potential of this technology to, among other things, improve safety, increase access to mobility, and maintain our global competitiveness. But our ability to realize the potential of autonomous vehicles in the US is predicated on having a workforce here that can develop and make and deploy the technology. And that is why today's discussion with this remarkable group of innovators is so important. We must begin and sustain, I would argue, a dialogue about how best to position the workforce to take full advantage of the new job opportunities that an autonomous vehicle future will bring. And that is also why today, as a complement to this important conversation, we at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation are releasing a new document with real world and specific examples of how AV technology and a 21st century American workforce go hand in hand. We are absolutely thrilled to be joining forces with the Partnership for Transportation, Innovation, and Opportunity on this event. And so I would like to now turn it over to Kathryn Branson, my co-moderator from PTIO, for a few opening comments.
Great, thank you, Hilary, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kathryn Branson. I am the Executive Director of the Partnership for Transportation, Innovation, and Opportunity, or PTIO. We are an industry-led organization that formed to focus on preparing workers for autonomous vehicle technology. So needless to say, we are thrilled to join with the Alliance today to explore that nexus with all of you, and can't thank you enough for joining us. A little bit of background about PTIO for those of you who may not be familiar with us. At a very basic level, our members support autonomous vehicle advancement and innovation in the transportation industry. We know that the technology is going to save lives, it's going to increase access to mobility, and it's going to expand the US economy and deliver a host of other societal benefits. Recognizing, though, that AVs will bring about economic opportunities and economic changes, PTIO formed to specifically examine the interplay between autonomous vehicles and the workforce, with an initial focus on deepening our understanding around what the technology would mean for jobs and what the technology would mean for the labor market, as well as identifying the information gaps here that we need to fill. Our members include companies and associations that span different segments of the AV and transportation sector, from OEMs to motor carriers, supply chain and logistics companies, retailers, and technology developers and AV companies. This type of representation is intentional. AVs are poised to have transformative impacts across the transportation sector writ large. And so from the outset, PTIO has wanted to ensure that our work takes as holistic approach as possible. And this includes making sure that stakeholders from all segments of the AV landscape are at the table with us. With that in mind, our ultimate objective is to identify the policies and the programs that are going to ensure that Americans benefit from the economic opportunities that the technology is going to create, including those whose job may evolve alongside autonomous vehicle deployment. And to that end, I am very pleased to announce that PTIO just today has released our first set of policy recommendations, and I will look forward to previewing those with all of you at the end of today's briefing. But first, we are so pleased to be joined by a panel of experts who really are truly at the forefront of this conversation And importantly, I'll provide nuanced perspectives on this issue based on where their company sits within the autonomous vehicle and transportation sector. So before we begin this important discussion, I'm going to turn the stage over to each of them to introduce themselves and their companies. So with that, I'm going to ask Robin Burns from Nuro to introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robin Burns, and I lead federal policy and government relations for Nuro. Nuro is a robotics company based in Mountain View, California, and our mission is to better everyday life through robotics. We're building zero occupant, zero emission autonomous vehicles for local deliveries with the goal of helping people access the things they need, whether it's groceries, prescriptions, or other essential items. Nuro wants to bring the cost of delivery down to as close to free as possible for the consumer. We believe that everyone should be able to access the things they need regardless of whether they own a car. And we do this with a custom vehicle that we've designed ourselves called the R2. And Nuro's R2 replaces you driving to and from the store. So what it does then, it adds an employee at your neighborhood grocery store who will pick and bag items and place them in the R2. And then the R2 will operate autonomously on the road with no room for a human occupant. It can detect pedestrians, cyclists, parked cars, and other vehicles that we share the road with. In February of 2020, we became the first and only autonomous vehicle company to receive an exemption from NHTSA to operate an AV with a novel design on public roads. We have operations in California, Texas, Arizona, and Nevada, and we have partnerships with leading companies such as Kroger, Domino's, FedEx, CVS, and Walmart.
Great, thank you, Robin. I'm going to turn the stage over to Robert now.
Thanks, Katie. I'm Robert Chiappetta with Toyota and am based in Washington, D.C. My responsibilities include workforce and labor public policy issues. In addition, I and others involved on the panel helped initiate the formation of PTIO, and I currently serve as its board president. So Toyota is hard at work developing the deployment of automated vehicle technologies. And we are committed to advancing these technologies in ways that improve society and individual well-being. And as such, we recognize the need to better understand the impact this may have on future jobs and employment. Toyota's involvement in PTIO is one of a few examples of how we're attempting to grapple with this issue. So thank you. I'm pleased to be a part of this conversation today and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Robert. Eric Danko.
Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you, Hilary. And thank you everyone for joining us today. It's really such a pleasure to be here. For those of you who I don't know yet, my name is Eric Danko. I'm the Director of Federal Affairs for Cruise. And Cruise, if you're not yet familiar, is a self-driving vehicle company partnered with General Motors and with Honda. We're building an L4 system, which is to say fully self-driving within a defined ODD, a geo-fenced area, which for us right now is San Francisco, which is exactly where our company is headquartered. You may have seen some very exciting news that after millions of miles driven in one of the most complex, dynamic driving environments in the country, San Francisco, 5 state permits from 2 regulatory bodies later, we have opened our doors to the public, which is really very exciting. And for the purposes of this conversation, really helps mark a transition from rote R&D to early stages of commercialization, which really speaks to where this industry is right now. I'm very happy to be having this conversation today. Hilary, as you mentioned at the top, the strength of the workforce is really important to everybody. And what we see in AV is a remarkably strong synergy between technology companies and legacy manufacturing that we think can really create a roadmap for the strength of the US economy in the 21st century. So thank you again.
Thank you, Eric. And last but not least, Tara.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tara Lanigan. I'm the head of policy at May Mobility. May is a self-driving technology startup based in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Our vision is to make the world a safer, greener, and more accessible place through our tech, which we deploy on shared passenger vehicles. And you can actually find us on the road and open to the public today in a few cities, including Grand Rapids, Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Arlington, Texas, and then outside of Indianapolis, Indiana, in a town called Fishers. So we're in these cities today working with local stakeholders, leaders, workers, and citizens to complement existing transportation systems and understand where AVs fit into that fabric. And we know that the potential and success of AVs are not just about the tech and the operations, which is why we put a big focus on safety, accessibility, sustainability, and workforce development. So thanks, Hilary and Katie, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Great. Thank you all very much. We appreciate the introductions and we are looking forward to hearing from all of you. So without further ado, let's jump in. Robin, I'm going to start with you. We've all witnessed over the past couple of decades how growth in last mile delivery, much in part fueled by the internet, has driven economic gains. Now that Nuro is leveraging autonomous vehicle technology in the last mile delivery context, can you talk a little bit about what you think this economic impact looks like and what it means for the workforce?
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Katie, for that question. So we know that delivery AVs will create jobs, and most of these jobs will actually be at the local level. The Steer Group found that delivery AVs, such as Nuro's, will create and sustain an average of 3.4 million jobs from 2025 to 2035. And to illustrate the size of this new workforce, the US has approximately 3.2 million public school teachers. So obviously a large scope and scale. We also know that autonomous delivery will replace a lot of the unpaid personal labor that we do today. About 90% of all shopping is still done in person by the consumer. Americans spend approximately 140 hours a year just driving to and from the store. So we know that autonomous delivery will save Americans 21 billion hours of driving to and from the store, which is equivalent to giving everyone about 1.5 hours back every week. This demonstrates how much of our own time, labor, and resources we spend on groceries and errands, and it's a lot. I think, our knee-jerk reaction is that more robots, more automation will equal fewer jobs, but new efficiencies can actually create jobs and expand services. Initially, people thought ATMs were the end of the bank teller, but in fact, it allowed bank tellers to focus more on customer service and personalized assistance. ATMs allowed banks to open more branches, especially in rural and underserved areas. And the number of bank tellers has actually grown over the years. I'll just conclude by mentioning how at Nuro we're focused on creating skilled jobs in technology and manufacturing for American workers. In August of 2021, we announced a $40 million investment in 2 facilities in Nevada, one for end-of-line manufacturing and one for testing and validation. And this will include an initial hire of 250 highly skilled workers.
That's great. So Robert, I'm going to ask you a question now. Toyota's obviously been a part of the auto industry for decades, and you've successfully navigated many advances in technology over the years. And so, can you talk a little bit about how Toyota views and approaches this sort of pattern of technological advancement and what it has meant for the company and its workforce? I'm particularly interested, for example, if there are existing training models, for example, that we could adapt to upskill workers for AV jobs.
Yes, Hilary, thank you. Automation is constant in the auto industry. If you walked on the shop floor at Toyota's Kentucky assembly plant, for example, you would notice all sorts of interesting new technologies. Sometimes they're very complicated, large machines, and sometimes they're very simple ones like cobots that assist our team members with the work that they do. But Toyota's success as a global manufacturer is not determined by the tools and the tactics that we deploy as much as it is about the way we manage team members and leverage their talents. So don't get me wrong, automation and technology are both very important. We wouldn't be able to remain competitive without them. But if technology is simply about eliminating the need for labor, as a company, you're squandering resources that you've invested in over time. A worker with 20 or more years of experience has a tremendous amount of knowledge and know-how. that person is an ambassador for your company in the community. So he or she is an asset in so many different ways. So at Toyota, we try to deploy technology in ways that help the team member do their job better. Now, technology might eliminate work, particularly work that can easily lead to injuries or is of low value. And if that's the case, a team member is freed up to do other more value-added work. And that's a good thing. In that situation, the team member helps the company remain competitive, and the redeployment of talent keeps the worker in demand and growing in his or her career. Now, in terms of training models, Toyota invests heavily in continuous education for its team members. And we've also been at the forefront of developing an advanced manufacturing training model that is, slowly becoming an industry standard. It's called the Federation of Advanced Manufacturing Education, or FAME USA. And so through a consortium of companies, and there are about 350 to 400 currently in the system, and partnerships with community colleges, there are about 40 community colleges across about 16 states supporting FAME. We have created a model that prepares students for in-demand careers in manufacturing. The model is highly successful. I think there's application for the AV industry as well. The key is to get industry engaged with the education sector in ways that create a strong workforce pipeline so that you can create what I like to call a win-win-win situation. A win for employers, a win for the schools, and most importantly, a win for students and their families. So we've done this in manufacturing, and I think it can be done in the emerging AV industry as well.
That's great. And Eric, I want to go to you and go in a little bit of a different direction now. So you mentioned already that you are that Cruise is commercializing its AV technology in partnership with automakers, General Motors, Honda. So I'm curious to get your thoughts about not only what your workforce looks like today, but what this technology might mean for the auto industry and your auto partners and their workforces.
Yeah, I love the question. Thank you, Hilary, for it. So Cruise is an American company, and what we're really committed to ensuring is that the future of the transportation industry stays in the United States. When we started at Cruise, this is 2013, we had 37 employees working out of one garage. You fast forward to today, we're roughly 3,000, representing everybody from engineers and programmers to technicians who calibrate, clean the vehicle, get the vehicles ready for launch, customer services professionals, everyone all the way down to like lowly government affairs people like myself. But the exciting part of the conversation, and really the crux of what you're asking, is that the reason that Cruise AVs are on the road isn't just because of the Cruise employee base, right? It's our partnership with the auto industry. And that's really where this conversation gets exciting. You look at our current fleet of vehicles, the Cruise AV today is based on the Chevy Bolt platform. Well, the Chevy Bolt platform, the Cruise AV, is built at GM's Lake Orion facility in Michigan, where it's a redistributed PTIO workforce. Our future vehicle, the Cruise Origin, where we submitted a petition to NHTSA just a few months ago, will be built at Factory Zero in Michigan, which you may remember President Biden toured just a few months ago. Now, the Origin is going to be one of the first platform vehicles that factory produces. Already, it's contributing to over 2,000 union jobs, right? So all of a sudden, we're starting to really get this sense of exactly what the jobs figures look like around autonomous vehicle technology. Now, add on to that the downstream impacts here. On the manufacturing side, we're talking about new supplier contracts. On the operations side, we're talking about fleet operators, right? Customer services professionals, et cetera. And because with Cruise, all of our vehicles are fully electric today and into the future, add on to this electric vehicle charging infrastructure, right? Today in San Francisco, Cruise is building one of North America's largest fast charging infrastructure facilities, and we're doing that with organized labor. Right? So you take it all together and you really start to get this more fulsome picture of the jobs that the AV industry is creating, right? It's not just potential to create, it's today, it's happening. And you get a sense of what this could mean at scale. And I alluded to this kind of in my opening, but we really think that it's this combination together that can create such a compelling model for American manufacturing in the 21st century, really bridging high-tech hubs like companies like Cruise in San Francisco with heartland manufacturing expertise, right? To come together in something that's very potent, that's creating new ecosystems of jobs around the country.
Great, thank you, Eric. I'm going to turn the stage to Tara now to talk a little bit about how May is working with transit agencies. We know that public transit agencies are at the core of a community's transportation system and connect its residents with mobility. So I'm curious, Tara, as May enters the markets where it is deploying its technology, how has the company engaged these agencies on technology, on planning, and on workforce matters?
Yeah, so transit agencies, like you said, definitely at the core of a community's transportation system. And when we interact with them, they're often at different levels or at different stages of how involved they are in the AV process. If they've ever owned one themselves, or if they're thinking about it, or if they're brand new. So that's why we find it essential to work with them if we hope to support a city in any effective way. And this is both in the short term and preparing for our pilots that you see on the road now, but also in the long term, which is especially important. And that's where we want to think bigger picture with these agencies so that we can both plan together for any technological shifts, coordination, and then of course, workforce planning. So I'll use our recent 6-month pilot in Indianapolis as an example. It's called Together in Motion and was launched last year with Energy Systems Network and the Toyota Mobility Foundation. And then Indigo, the local transit agency, was also a partner. And we worked with them many months before the pilot to think through routes, signage, customer service, messaging, really anything they would do for one of their own routes. But we were also able to work with them on longer term planning and brainstorming around AVs. So we hosted 10 or 15 Indigo employees at the local May base station. And these folks specialized in topics from safety to HR to maintenance to innovation. We really tried to get everyone in there that we could. And we pulled back the curtain for them to show them how we were running the service behind the scenes, let them poke around in the vehicles, had our engineers take them for a ride in the AVs, and then had an in-depth Q&A session. And then we later had a follow-up workshop with them as well as their leadership after they had some time to mull it over to discuss what specific gaps that they saw AVs filling for them in the future, how to think through that training and retraining and any other benefits and challenges. So that's why we see it as essential to continue partnering with transit agencies as we all sort of navigate and orchestrate these shifts together.
That's great. Thank you, Tara. And I think that, in some ways leads us to our next point when we're talking about shifts in a workforce. We've talked already about the economic gains that autonomous vehicles are going to bring to the transportation industry, as well as the economy as a whole. But what we haven't yet talked about, and I want to make sure we directly address it, is the topic of potential job disruption. And this is a concern, as all of you know, and as all of the participants likely know, that comes up often in conversations about autonomous vehicles and the workforce. So I was hoping that we could hear some of our panelists' perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks, Kathryn. I'm happy to start, and then we'll turn the floor over to other colleagues here. I appreciate the opportunity to really address this head on because it is a critical issue. So really, thank you for asking the question. It's important to recognize that the economy is always changing, right? And transportation isn't immune to that. But as I was noting, kind of in my earlier comments, it's also important to recognize that AVs are built by people, they're developed by people, they're maintained by people. And when you have an EV fleet like Cruise, they're also charged by people, infrastructure that's installed by people, right? So it really kind of leads you to recognize that AVs are already creating good jobs in this country. And the potential is there to keep doing that, provided that the US remains a leader in the space. right? It's clear that this is where the industry is headed. And that's true, not because Cruise says it's true. You look, virtually every single automaker in the world and every major technology developer in the world is investing billions of dollars in the pursuit of this technology to really bring it to life. So the question isn't if AV, it's more where AV. And we really want that to be here in the United States. You know, the auto industry is a driver of the US economy, right? It represents over 10 million Americans, 5.5% of our GDP, about $99 billion in annual exports a year. We need the industry to stay here, right? Right now, the US is leading in AV from a technology perspective, but other countries are further ahead when it comes to the policy side of the equation. And they're not waiting for us to catch up. Germany has a federal framework that's been established. China has an all-of-government approach. If we want the United States to remain a leader in the field, policymakers really need to take action here.
That's really well said, Eric, and I'll build on that a bit. So May Mobility sees autonomous vehicles not as something to replace what is working out there today. For example, if there's a high volume bus in a densely populated area, but we do see them as a way to solve certain transportation problems that do exist. And I'll also say that we don't see AV companies being the only ones at the table to make decisions around how the workforce supports AVs. As Eric said, it's not for Cruise to decide things. It's not for May Mobility to decide things. We want to continue working with transit agencies, legislators, unions to figure out the best approach and to make sure those changes that will happen and should happen in the US are good ones and the right ones.
Yeah, those are great points, Tara. I would add that, you know, I've talked a little bit about redeployment of talent, and certainly that is possible as AVs change the nature of work at some companies. You know, but we do need to be honest about the fact that some work will get eliminated, and you know, transition could be hard for some people depending on their age, depending on their skill level, or their interest in being redeployed. You know, but the interesting thing is that the mass deployment of AVs will not happen today. It's not going to happen tomorrow. You know, luckily we have time to think through how the transition will occur and what can be done to minimize the impacts. And you know, this is precisely what PTIO is trying to do. You know, part of what we can do now, for example, is to help government understand the gaps that may exist in the data and the research that we need to be able to better predict how this transition will occur. You know, even Toyota, an OEM developing the technology, doesn't know all of the ways the technology will be deployed. So better data is needed. And then in addition, you know, we need to engage communities, as was mentioned, you know, in a more robust dialogue on this topic. You know, I'm thrilled that, you know, PTIO has started that process and has engaged with various communities across the country to understand their level of awareness and preparedness. And then, you know, we need to go even further than that and look at how different communities will be impacted. You know, just the other day, the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, a think tank here in Washington, released a report on federal workforce training programs and how they are tracked. And the report concluded that the programs frequently fail to report data by race. And they suggest that more robust data analysis that includes careful evaluation of disaggregated racial data could improve the racial equity in workforce training programs. So these are just some of the data and research gaps that need to be filled before the full transition to AVs, if we are to minimize the negative impacts. But the good news is we have time and we should act now on some of these ideas.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if I could jump in here, you know, I mean, I want to bring Robin into the conversation because I know that Nuro has launched, I think it's the first community college program to prepare the next generation of skilled autonomous fleet technicians. And so I was hoping you could tell us a little bit more about the program and also sort of what led Nuro to create it.
Of course. Thanks so much, Hilary, for the question. So Nuro is excited to partner with De Anza College in Cupertino to offer a new career pathway that will prepare the next generation of fleet technicians specializing in electric autonomous vehicles. So as Nuro has scaled, we found that candidates who have the skills to be fleet technicians are actually some of the hardest to find, because we need workers with skills in both autonomous vehicle and electric vehicle technology. So essentially people with cutting edge skills in new technologies. These jobs just didn't exist 10 years ago, and there isn't a large pool of candidates who are trained in working in both of these technologies at the same time. And so what we've seen is that community colleges across the country have a lot of the courses that train folks in these skills, but they were sort of spread across departments from computer programming to automotive mechanics. And this partnership with De Anza will serve as the blueprint for Nuro's Autonomous Upskilling Initiative, which is a program that will partner with community colleges in Nuro's operating areas across the nation to create education and training opportunities for workers looking to upskill. As an option, this program includes a completely tuition-free path. Students can complete the level 1 coursework by taking free non-credit versions of the same courses at De Anza, making this an excellent opportunity to gain valuable career training without the financial cost. So these jobs that we're creating with this Career Pathways program are good paying jobs, of course, with living wages in the Bay Area with full benefits. And we're really excited to replicate this program across the country. We recently announced a partnership with San Jacinto College in Houston and look forward to finding new partnerships across the nation.
Excellent. Thank you, Robin. And I just think that's so exciting and really reflects the point that Eric was making earlier, that the AV industry is here today and it's creating and providing jobs and, creating career pathways that are going to result in entry points for the workforce. So that's great to hear. And while we're on the topic, Robert, I was hoping you could talk to us about a new initiative that Toyota just announced called Driving Possibilities. My understanding is that it is to prepare students for automotive jobs. Can you tell us a little bit about this initiative and also a little bit more about Toyota's approach in designing it?
Yes, thank you, Katie. This was an exciting announcement we made a few weeks ago. Toyota is committing $110 million towards K through 12 education in communities where we have operations to better prepare students for the opportunities in the changing automobile industry. So it has an eye towards the transition towards EVs as well as AVs. We launched previously a pilot project in collaboration with the Dallas Independent School District and Southern Methodist University called the West Dallas STEM School. It takes a holistic approach looking seriously at issues related to equity, as well as the project-based STEM curriculum that was developed for it. About 92% of the students in the program are from economically disadvantaged areas in the city. And the project is going very well, and we want to create similar collaborations in more communities. So, like I said, we have time to prepare for this transition, but we do need to start now. And so a child entering kindergarten this year could very well, when they graduate from high school or from college, consider a career in the AV industry. And, we need to start preparing that person now for those opportunities. And that's what this project is all about.
Excellent. Thanks, Robert. I want to switch gears just a tiny bit here and Tara, ask you to speak to something. We talk a lot about AVs and their impact on jobs, but what we haven't talked about yet is what about AVs and their impact on connecting people to jobs and to work. So I was hoping, sitting where you sit with May Mobility in the transit space, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is really what we're talking about when we say that AVs have a really high potential to make a positive shift if we work at it with all of the various stakeholders. This could be, a whole separate panel on this topic, but there are, plenty of folks who don't have access to transportation today. Maybe they live too far from the closest bus line. Maybe they can't afford a car, or they live in a rural area. or they rely on paratransit and it requires 48-hour lead time. So we see AVs as a way to help fill these gaps and connect someone to a job that they wouldn't have previously been able to access if it weren't for an autonomous service being added to that equation.
That's great. Eric, I want to go back to you because you said something earlier, and I want to peel back the onion a little bit more. So we talked about how, you know, AVs will build upon the strength of the U.S. auto industry and the jobs that technology has created and sort of will create as we go forward. And you also hit on this a little bit, but I want to just ask you right out. You talked about the role of policymakers in facilitating continued growth of the industry in the U.S. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, have you talk a little bit more about that and get your opinion on whether, in your mind, a federal framework for AV deployment is sort of necessary to achieve this goal. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, Hilary. I had a hunch you were going to pick up on that breadcrumb. So thanks for the question. Federal leadership is absolutely critical here, right? You have companies like Cruise that are really turning the corner from R&D to early commercialization. And if the US is going to remain a leader in the space, industry needs to have the certainty to keep investing here. That's absolutely critical, and that's a role for policymakers. Now, if you look at states that have encouraged AV development, you can already see very clearly that the prospect of job creation isn't just future tense, it's present tense, right? We're talking about states geographically diverse: California, Nevada, Arizona, Washington State, Michigan, Texas, Florida, Pennsylvania, and I'm absolutely positive that I'm missing some right here. As I said earlier, the US is leading the way in AV development, but competitor nations are nipping at our heels, right? I mentioned a minute ago, Germany has established a federal framework for AVs. China has an all-of-government approach. This isn't theoretical. I'll give you some quick information on California, right, where Cruise does the majority of its testing. Of the roughly 60 some odd companies that are permitted to test driverless vehicles on public roads in California, only 7, including Cruise, are permitted to do so fully driverless, right? No safety operator in the vehicle. Of those 7 companies, 3 are Chinese. This is a very real race. The most important thing right now for federal policymakers to do is to create an on-ramp for industry to scale in the United States so that we can keep making the investments here, we can keep building the vehicles here, we can keep hiring here and keep creating the jobs here, right? And there's a direct correlation between the two, right? How many vehicles can we build and how large can the workforce get? There's a direct line from A to B. That's a role that Congress needs to play.
Thank you, Eric. Well said. Tara, I wanted to chat with you about transit and jobs in the transit universe in AV future. We've talked a little bit about some of the delivery jobs, some of the manufacturing jobs that we might see evolve and arise along autonomous vehicles. How is May thinking about the universe of transit jobs in this AV future?
Yeah, I think, Eric, actually, you touched on this really well earlier. AVs still need maintenance, they need engineering, they need people who specialize in EVs. And on top of that, it's not just about what's happening in the future, it's there are jobs now. So I think you've communicated that really well, and we feel the same way at May Mobility. This is also what we're continually evaluating in partnership with transit agencies, and it's why pilots are so important. So we're currently in talks with an agency to plan, a workshop, but something that's just really tangible and letting us get into the details around the transition of AV operations from an AV company to a transit agency, because there's so many details, challenges involved there. So there's lots of how-tos to talk through with them. We're also involved with organizations like the Michigan Mobility Institute, which is working on upskilling programs and mobility workforce development. So we're thinking about this, like you said, universe of job opportunities for transit and in an AV future by continuing to evaluate through pilots, by working with our stakeholders on just workshopping what these jobs need to be, and by working with organizations who are taking on this specific issue.
That's fantastic. I think we have time for at least one more question, and I'm going to take a moderator privilege and ask Eric to jump in on something that we hinted at earlier, but I think it's important that we dig a little bit deeper before we close out the program for today. And this is on the topic of equity, which is something that often arises when thinking about and talking about AVs. And I know that you all at Cruise have a program called Future Works that really is focused on connecting historically underrepresented communities with tech careers. And so I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about the program and how you think Cruise and other stakeholders can ensure that these sorts of career opportunities are equitable and accessible to populations across the country.
Yeah, I think Hilary, you just captured it so perfectly. So thank you for that. Equity in workforce is a major area of focus. And to be clear, that's not just for the AV industry, right? That needs to be cross-sector across the economy, especially because the competition for talent is so robust across every sector of the economy. We've been working through our social impact programs at Cruise to partner with organizations in the communities that we hope to serve and support to actually amplify their own expertise. So these are organizations in San Francisco like Young Community Developers, YCD, in the Bayview and Hunters Point area of San Francisco, historically underserved. We're also partnering with a wonderful organization called Human Made that provides continuing education, jobs training, skills training, hands-on experience with advanced manufacturing, advanced machines like Tormach machines, CNC machines, and specifically focuses on putting those in the hands of historically underserved communities. Now, critically, and this really goes to your point, these are skills that aren't just important to the AV industry, they're important to the modern economy as a whole, which is the bridge that the organization is really trying to build. Right? The AV industry has to be at the forefront of this, but it really is economy-wide. From an AV perspective, we need to make sure that not only our product and our service, but also the jobs available are done so to as large a community as possible. And that's really what we're focused on doing.
Thank you, Eric. And I think we've reached that time where I want to give a big thank you to our wonderful panel for their insightful comments and for really taking the time to share them with all of us today. And while we are at the end of today's conversation, I want to invite everyone tuning in to join us as we look ahead, because as mentioned earlier, PTIO knows that the transition to an AV future is not going to happen overnight. And as Robert mentioned, there is still more to learn about what this looks like. That said, we believe that the time to prepare is now, and we have the opportunity to do a couple of things. Number one, we can structure the workforce system in ways that facilitate entry into new autonomous vehicle career pathways, and also in ways that support workers who may need to transition. Number two, we have the opportunities to support policies that are going to help us continue to collect information about what that transition to autonomous vehicles looks like. And I am excited to announce, as I previewed earlier, that PTIO is releasing a policy agenda today that includes recommendations which will accomplish both of those objectives. First and foremost, I just wanted to be clear, we know that policies that are put forth in this conversation absolutely have to reflect an evidence-based and data-driven understanding of the AV workforce interplay if we want to get this right. And we do want to get this right. We've spent time as an organization engaging with economists, community organizations, educators, academics, nonprofits, and lawmakers at the local, state, and federal levels to solicit their expertise, as well as their concerns around matters pertaining to AV adoption, as well as workforce development issues and economic transition generally. The policies that we are putting forward in our agenda are those that we have identified based on that work to date, and the ones that reflect our understanding of where the workforce and AV's interplay exists today. Importantly, and Eric talked about this a little bit earlier, I really want to emphasize that PTIO strongly believes that these are policies that can and should be pursued alongside continued efforts to enact a responsible federal framework that's going to allow autonomous vehicles to scale within the United States. In fact, the two complement each other. As we've heard today, a federal framework is absolutely critical for workforce opportunity and domestic job growth, but it's also going to drive the real world autonomous vehicle deployments that are going to inform the conversations and that are going to develop the programs that are ultimately going to connect workers with autonomous vehicle careers and facilitate re and upskilling where those transitions might need to occur. And, as we heard from a few other panelists earlier, the AV industry is here today. It's yielding new jobs and career pathways. And right now, our focus should be on building the initiatives that are going to cultivate that workforce pipeline over time. Nuro's community college program that Robin talked about in California is such a perfect example of how industry is wrapping around an existing deployment to build a program that connects workers with an AV opportunity that's here today. We need to encourage these types of partnerships, which is why PTIO is recommending that Congress authorize a permanent community college and industry partnership program to support the development of these programs across the country and at scale. Similarly, we think that Congress should also focus on policies that meaningfully incentivize what are referred to as sector partnerships. And sector partnerships are collaboratives between employers, educators, community organizations, labor groups, and other stakeholders that routinely convene at the local and regional levels to conduct workforce planning based on local labor market realities. And providing dedicated funding for their formation is a really good first step here. As Robert has mentioned, we also acknowledge that AVs will catalyze economic changes and occupational shifts. And one of the key takeaways we've learned in our conversations with experts is that a strong labor market information infrastructure that is capable of providing the real-time information about occupations that are emerging, that are growing, changing, and shrinking in a local labor market is so critically important in mitigating any type of workforce disruption. So enhancing information collected via something called administrative wage records, for example, is a proposal that economists have actually recommended for this purpose, and PTIO thinks it's a great place to start. Also discussed today, we know that AVs already are catalyzing economic benefits and will continue to catalyze tremendous economic gains, both in the transportation sector and also across the economy. Investing in workers in ways that, number one, empower them to move about that workforce system that we are seeking to make more nimble, and number two, exercise choice in their own career trajectories and pathways should be a top priority for us all. And we can do this via ideas like portable skills training accounts, which would allow an individual to reskill over the course of their career and secure new credential or work competencies as needed. And to promote a smooth transition, we need to focus on ways to encourage more individuals to reskill before they are separated from employment. And PTIO proposes that lawmakers lift caps in existing law that actually limit the amount of training funds that are available to these incumbent workers. All of these proposals, among others, are captured in our larger policy agenda. And while I unfortunately don't have time to share them all with you today, we'd love for you to check out the full report on our website, ravfuture.org. Again, we look forward to continuing this conversation over the coming months with all of you. And we're eager to work with lawmakers and others as we strive to advance this technology and also increase economic opportunity for our workforce. I want to thank the Auto Innovators for convening this briefing with us today. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the week. Thank you so much.